Listen, I just was listening to Christian radio the other day, so obviously that probably gives you my bent.
You know, I listen to Christian radio too, so it doesn't necessarily...
It doesn't say too much.
Okay. They were talking about, I guess, Du Bois and some of the other early scientists who were doing archaeological studies back in the early 20th century, 1900s, and how some of those had been fake models, like they had a pig's tooth that had been filed down to...
Yes.
Yeah, that was actually a media sensation. It never got real big acceptance among the scientific community.
Yeah, how about with the Brown versus Board of Education? They had presented false evidence and things like that. I was just curious as to, has there been a good amount of replacement information for that? Because, you know, there are certain believers that believe that God used something like evolution. Evolution is just a terminology that's got a lot of people excited about what it means, but that the actual type of process of evolution, of natural selection and things like that, that it may have been something that God used. But so we go back and forth about who has, you know, the truth or whatever. But I'm just wondering, have they replaced that evidence? I mean, do we have really something besides just a tooth? Or, I mean, do we have full-blown skeletons? And carbon dating is something I worry about too. I mean, how do we really know that carbon dating is accurate and effective? I don't know. I mean, you've heard all the arguments from the creationist side.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I've brought up, of course, in the public school system and have a scientific an education in that, and I know about astronomy and some sciences and so some physics, but I'm just wondering, how complete a picture do we have of early humanoids?
It's of early humanoids. It's actually one of the most complete lines of evidence we have for evolution. I mean, there's actually a site which I love to refer people to. It's on Talk Origins, which is that site there, and it's on their hominid page, and they've just got a little page with pictures of skulls that they've dug up, and these skulls sort of have a progression. You know, there's like 10 of them. And they show gradual change over time. Of course, the creationists believe that these are all, you know, one thing or the other, because there's no such thing as evolution from ape ancestors to humans, right? So they all say it's either, yeah, that's definitely an ape, or that's definitely a human, and there's nothing in between. But the great thing about it is they don't agree on which are which. So some of the creationists say, yeah, this one is definitely a human skull, and some of them say, yeah, this is definitely an ape skull. Yeah. And the closer you get to the middle, the more you find they disagree with each other. So even though the creationists are sure that there are no intermediates between the two, they're you know, they can't agree on which is which kind of tends to bolster the point.
Well, because what they seem to be doing is, as you say, categorizing them. Mm-hmm. They'll have, you know, you can take an entire progression.
Right.
Let's just say that we could follow the exact species. We had every single fossil from my grandfather 7 million years back. We had every single one. At some point, they would draw the line and say, okay, human, 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 ape. There's the line. You see, there's no transitional fossils. Well, if you classify things like that, you're never going to have anything.
Right.
And so, and that's what they're saying. There's more and more gaps in evolution now. Well, because they're actually being filled up. When you take a gap and you fill it with something, you have 2 gaps now. So they're saying there's more and more gaps.
Yeah, of course, you know, the thing is you have to keep in mind that human evolution fits into a larger picture of evolution as a whole. And a lot of creationists, you know, think, well, it's okay to teach evolution in general as long as you don't teach that humans were ever anything other than humans.
Yeah.
But if you look at it from a bigger picture, there are all kinds of ways that there are evidence for evolution. I mean, the fossil record is one of them, but that's not even necessarily the best thing we have. There's, you know, comparative DNA of things. You know, when they appear to share the same features, we classify them as Yeah, we classify them as being related to each other in some way, and only in recent years have we been able to analyze the DNA of different kinds of animals and found out, wow, the DNA similarity between these animals we thought was related matches up almost astoundingly well to the things that we arranged in the evolutionary tree before we knew anything about DNA. There's the Geologic Column, which basically shows certain kinds of creatures appearing in one strata and nowhere else, and nearly always appearing in the same order, except when there were in places where we know that there were major tectonic shifts. Okay. A good site, again on talkorigins.org, is something called 29 Evidences for Macroevolution, which I think is listed in their main fact page, which, you know, that's good for many hours of reading.
Hey, could I ask you another quick one there?
Sure.
When they talk about what is a specific design or something like that, and I heard somebody talking about the eye. It's like they say, well, how could you have? And again, I'm interested in this because I understand the actual process of selection that comes from the environment. You know, some specimens are going to survive over thousands of generations, and some aren't, and you know that affects the way that things become either tolerant for cold or like polar bears, brown bears, and black bears, and so. I'm just wondering about the fact that they talk about that as one of their ideas about the eye. Is that how do you accidentally, just through or just by slow gradual process, how would you develop a nerve, the optic lens, the receptor in the brain?
Right.
Yeah.
All of the different parts that are required for vision. And I can think like you got a little insect or something that can only see dimly and it doesn't really focus on anything. But you still got to have some kind of nerves for that. And so, just like a mutation kind of thing, but even that being an accident, how would...
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I mean, that's what creative design is all about. It's like, it seems like there definitely was something that...
Intelligent design is the term.
Oh, that's the one, right? There you go. Intelligent design.
Yeah, well...
that and what do you think about how, just using the eye maybe as a...
Yeah.
First of all, something they like to say a lot is, what good is half an eye? If you only evolved half an eye, it would be just as bad as no eye at all. Yeah. Well, the obvious counterexample is, do you wear glasses?
Me? No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wear contact lenses, and I'm almost blind as a bat when I don't wear them, but not really, because I can see real fuzzy things far away. I can make out shapes, and it's a lot better than being blind, in my opinion, because if for instance a car was coming at me, I'd be like, hey, this big blurry shape over here is getting really big.
Really fast.
I get out of the way. So, it's not like there aren't any backward steps that can be taken from where we are. Having a really good lens is one thing that makes an eye really good. But you can actually make a really good lens or a fairly good lens using, I've read this, but I haven't tried it, but if you have a plastic bag and that's filled with water, and you just sort of randomly poke at it, eventually you're going to get to the point where you can see things more clearly and be able to figure out more specifically where the light is coming from.
Okay.
But going back much farther, I know that doesn't answer your question. Eyes start with, the most basic form of an eye is a photosensitive patch on the skin. Something that basically tells you either there's light there or there's not light there. I don't know how that works because I'm not real good at chemistry, but basically if light hitting a certain spot causes some nerves to fire somewhere, then you've got a basic eye. Would you agree? I mean, you can't see stuff.
Well, it'd be like heat. Light is just a type of energy, and so I can see where we feel heat, the same thing.
Right.
So you've got a nerve that's connecting somewhere in there, but I guess, again...
Okay, but that's the first step.
One step at a time.
Yeah,
right, that's the first step. The next step is that if you have a bunch of different receptors in different places, then you can kind of evolve to tell where the light is coming from, right? Because, you know, if this patch goes off, then there's some light over there. And if this patch goes off, then there's some light over there. So then you gradually get directional, directional sensitivity to light. Now these different receptors might be randomly distributed, or they might be all over your body for a while. But if they keep scrambling around sort of randomly as the generations go on, then eventually they're going to get in the most efficient position for pinpointing exactly where light is coming from. Because things that are better at figuring out where light comes from are less likely to die because they didn't notice the light. And so gradually they can actually arrange themselves into a pattern which most clearly figures out where light is coming from, and it just so happens that that's a convex bowl that's like this. Because any light that hits right here is obviously coming there, and you've got a continuous sequence of these little light spots. And so you can tell within a fairly wide radius exactly where light's coming from. And after that, again, we get back to the paper bag. The plastic bag with the water in it. If you squish it around, you find that you can actually focus the light so you can get more precise ideas of what shape something is in. And, that's a real quick overview. If you want to read more, there's a great summary in Richard Dawkins's book. I forget which one. I think it's The Blind Watchmaker.
Okay. And from my understanding, actually, I have seen that article, or at least on the website or something like that. They do have a fairly detailed explanation of, here's the photosensitive patch of skin, here's the eye, and here's a pretty good sequence of steps in between.
The cool thing is that we can find creatures today that are in every stage of evolution that I just named. We can find all kinds of eyes out there, some better than others, that exhibit exactly what happens when you take away a little bit at a time from an eye.
Yeah.
Okay, so they do have that. That sounds great. Can I do one more?
One more, and then we're going to have to go on to other callers.
Okay. I just want to ask you, and this is from a philosophical point of view and a logical point of view, and I've talked to people before, and I am a Christian. I'd just like to ask if you believe there's a possibility of a creator. And then I would like to say that if you look at the very beginning, that one of the dimensions of our universe is time, that if you have matter, if you have the energy that of matter, you have time. And if you have time, you have a beginning. And we go back to the Big Bang, and we look at the very beginning, and we say that's the origin of time, where, that time almost comes to a standstill, but there still has to be a point of origin. And some people think, well, maybe the universe has exploded and contracted repeatedly over, who knows how many trillions or, hundreds of trillions of years, who knows. But in the original analysis, there has to be a beginning. And
why?
Why?
Yeah. Again, if that's the idea that perhaps it's expanded and contracted, which is a theory.
There has to be a first time.
Why?
Because that is one of the dimensions of time. It has a beginning.
But time didn't exist before. Time as we know it wasn't a thing before.
Well, even if you took all, I understand Einstein's theories, and even if you took all the matter in the universe, you put it to a little bitty pinprick, there was time. There had to be a beginning. And so my question
as you compress stuff more and more densely, time actually slows down.
Right, very,
and you get
slow.
Back to...
I understand that. That's what I mean. I've understood that, and I've studied this, but I still understand that with the dimension of being time, that there has to be a beginning. And so my question is that did the universe create itself? Because, see, we say that there is a creator, and that is our God. Okay. And people who don't believe in a God say that the universe created. See, people say, well, God can't exist because he didn't exist. How could
let me lay this down right now. We don't say that God can't exist.
Oh, you don't?
No, we just think that we don't see any good reason to believe in God.
Isn't that what atheist means? That
atheism means lack of theism, which means we don't believe in a God. But that doesn't mean that there's no way that we couldn't ever be convinced that there is a God. Yeah, it's just we haven't been.
We haven't seen any good evidence yet
Okay, well, that's
to say that there is
the
a
best
God.
one. This is the one. This is the best one. Is that there must be a beginning, and so either the universe created itself, or something created it.
Okay. Well. What happens?
Time is a dimension, and time requires.
And what happens if we put time aside for the moment, because that's kind of a side argument.
Sure.
But you're saying the universe had to have a creator. What if we push that back a further step and say, okay, God's there. Why doesn't God need a creator?
Well,
God existed. According to you, I assume.
Right.
Before the universe, He created it, so He was there before.
Right.
So
He's outside of time. He doesn't have that dimension.
Why doesn't God have to be part of that?
He's not physical.
So as long as there's something that's not physical, you would be satisfied?
Well, I would say that the universe is matter. That's the whole point.
Okay, but as long as there's something non-physical out there, it doesn't have to be God. It could be a ham sandwich outside the universe.
It has matter. Well,
a spiritual ham sandwich.
Okay.
Okay. I guess there's a consciousness. We believe that God has awareness. And consciousness, but He doesn't have.
Well, sure, you believe
matter.
that, but what evidence do you have?
Yeah, that doesn't explain why God gets to be out of the must have a creator business, though. If the universe has to have a creator, then God would also need to have a creator. If you can accept that there are some things or some ideas or some entities that don't need a creator, God, then why can't we just say, okay, then the universe is one of those things that doesn't need a creator and it can just happen?
Right. Let's say that we accept your position that there's something somewhere that doesn't have a creator.
Mm-hmm.
Why complicate it by giving it all these magic powers? By saying, it can recite prayers and it has a plan and stuff like that. Why not just say, oh, there's this tiny little speck that doesn't have a creator, and eventually everything just follows from that.
Well, that's okay. I'm thinking because I've never had an atheist before tell me that the universe and admit that the universe created itself, and so
we didn't say that.
I guess not that it created itself, but that it is just self-evident, that it's self-existing. That it
we're not exactly saying that either.
Because in other words, that would be the same definition that we have for God. That God just is.
Yeah. Well, science basically says that cosmology essentially is the one that we're talking about here, where once you have matter, this is what forms, and you have gravity, and you can form stars and solar systems and such. We can follow time. We can follow the matter of the universe back and see what the universe was from about the size of a grapefruit or a golf ball on. We know everything past that.
Yeah, I believe that's 10 to the minus 43 seconds
exactly.
after the Big Bang.
Exactly. It's some infinitesimally small amount of time. As for what happened before that, we don't know. We're not saying that, it just spontaneously formed. We're not saying that it was two universes. There's another theory that on subatomic levels, you can have certain quantum events that can form universes.
Right, bubble universe.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know exactly what happened. We're looking into it. But we don't know yet, and there's a possibility that we may never know just because the rules of physics break down when you're at something that small and that hot and dense and whatnot. So we don't know, we may not know, but we're willing to say that. We're willing to say that we don't know and we're looking into it, rather than we don't know, so it must have been God, or it must have been aliens, or it must have been whatever. We don't know. If we had gone back a couple hundred years, then we could say lightning, I don't know how it happened, so it must be God. Now we have good ideas on exactly what lightning is, so we use those instead. As for the creation of the universe or beginning of life, we don't know for sure. We're looking into it. Get back to us in a couple of years. Maybe we'll have a good answer for you then.
Couple thousand years, maybe.
Maybe a couple thousand years, maybe tomorrow.
Even, yeah.
But maybe never. But we don't know. We're looking into it.
Right, but not knowing things doesn't justify making something up and saying that's the answer.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I understand that, and I agree that neither one of us really has the evidence that we're looking for. So we're actually saying that there is something outside of what we can know, and that has the ability to create something out of nothing. And an atheist would say, well, the universe is self-evident and self-creating.
But we don't say that.
We don't say that, though. That is one possibility.
Okay, so
Scientists
you're saying
have
it
said
is
that-
possible that there is a creator.
Well, sure,
It's
it's
possible, but
and it's also possible that we're all brains hooked up in vats in the Matrix.
Yeah.
But until I see some kind of evidence that that's really the case, I won't give it any more credibility than the possibility of like other creationist myths that say things like, oh, you know, God created or God molded people in giant cookie cutters and sneezed them all into various areas of the earth.
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of different theories out there, but none of them has any evidence to it or any credence. And so until we find one that does, they're all just, you know, an idea that with nothing to back it up.
Okay, and so I guess the only thing that the Christians really have that they could claim is a personal experience. And then, of course, there's people who would say that that's just some kind of psychotic thing, right? So it's not really a real thing.
Basically, yeah, brain chemistry, again, what happens in your head doesn't dictate isn't reality.
Right.
For most people, it is. When I see this coffee cup here, that's real.
Yeah.
I'm assuming. But
again, we might be in the Matrix.
We hope
here.
we hope. But yeah, I mean, if I had a personal experience with God, that doesn't prove anything.
Maybe not to anybody else.
Exactly.
Because we're talking about evidence here, and evidence is pretty hard. That's a pretty hard standard of a level of place to prove something.
It is, and
like
that's why
you have a very difficult time proving.
Which is why we rely on science so much, because that's what science gives us. It gives us something that has been tested time and time and time again.
It gives us
and shown
standards
to be true.
You know, otherwise you just have to go in. You know, when you go into a mental asylum and you see a guy who says, "Hey, I'm Napoleon reincarnated," you know, well, you can't prove that he's wrong. But you have no reason to believe that without evidence. So science just kind of gives us a way of filtering out, you know, this is probably true because it has a lot of evidence, from this kind of sounds like something that somebody made up at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, right there, there's a preponderance of people in my circles or whatever. You know, in our country, there's a huge number of people who actually do try to give you the evidence.
Well, there are a preponderance of people who believe that, but believing things, again, like believing you're Napoleon, even if 100 million people believed they were Napoleon, they still wouldn't be.
Okay. Well, that sounds interesting. Well, hopefully we'll all have some answers someday that we can agree on.
Okay.
And I do appreciate what you're doing. I know that you're seeking something there.
Well,
and
we're here to give our perspective on the world. So.
Yep. It's good to see that you admit there might be some credence to the other side's arguments.
Well, again, there might be, but until it gives evidence, we're not gonna.
But you sound like a nice guy, Mike. It was good to talk to you.
Yeah, it was good to talk with you too.
Thanks a lot for
Have a great
calling.
day.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.